Today's conversation is with Patrick J. Murphy, a former Army JAG officer, the 32nd Undersecretary of the Army, and America's first Iraq War veteran elected to Congress. Patrick is passionate about helping fellow veterans realize their entrepreneur dreams, tell their stories, and secure quality healthcare services. His journey spans public service, politics, business, media, and education, all topics we dive into throughout this episode. It's almost as if Patrick has more than 24 hours in his days and has already lived several lifetimes worth of experiences. Let's get into this conversation with the Honorable Patrick J. Murphy. Most people you talk to when transitioning out of the military have never actually transitioned out themselves. You're probably getting a bunch of opinions from people who plan on staying in until retirement and have no idea how to actually show empathy for your situation. This podcast is about providing fresh perspectives and a front row seat for conversations with successful veterans doing big things after leaving the military.
Hey guys, it's Patrick. How are you?
Hey, Patrick,
Jack
good to see
Griffin.
you.
Great to see you guys too.
We appreciate you making the time.
Of course,
excited to jump into this conversation. Very impressed by your background, needless to say, but also impressed by what you continue to do to help veterans, veteran entrepreneurs, and people across the space. So I think this will be a really interesting conversation.
I think so too.
We're excited about today because, our focus for the podcast is seemed to trend a little bit towards entrepreneurship, although it wasn't necessarily our only focus. But we're trying to just give people an understanding of what others have done to successfully transition out of service. And because there's enough information out there on a lot of topics, there's not a lot on veterans becoming entrepreneurs. So it seems like a lot of the people we've interviewed have been entrepreneurs themselves. So I'm excited about this interview and looking forward to see what we can provide for others.
Good. Awesome. All right, let's get after it.
Yeah, Patrick, I'd love to hear more about your background and probably the question that you hear over and over again, but I think taking a slightly different direction to start, I noticed you have an ice hockey background, that you have a little bit of experience on the ice. So I'd love to ask the broad question of how you think that influenced your approach to life, business, et cetera. Because every single hockey player, similar to wrestlers that I meet, has a certain edge to them in a good way, and it affects how they approach everything else.
No doubt. Yeah, listen, I was blessed. I was the youngest of three, and we started playing row hockey in our neighborhood. I lived in a row house where, we would play hockey out front on roller skates, check each other in the parked cars, and have to move the nets when cars are going by. But evolved into ice hockey, and my brother and I got an opportunity to go play in college. We played at King's College, it's in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. It's a D3 college, and he was the captain of the team. And then when he graduated, I was the 3-year captain, and he was the leading goal scorer in King's College history. And I led the team in penalties and points. So I still get out there and play. It's a great sport. And some of our best warriors, frankly, are former athletes.
One of my claims to fame in the sport of basketball was having more fouls than points most games. So I can empathize there.
Everybody has to play their role.
That's right. My high school basketball coach always said, "Get in where you fit in." So that was what I was trying to do.
So with the transition, were you interested in joining the military while you were kind of coming up? Was that part of the plan while in college?
Yeah, well, I'm a third-generation veteran. So my grandfather served in the Navy in the Pacific in World War II, came back, was a Teamster for a few decades. My dad served in the Navy during Vietnam, came back, was a cop in Philly for 22 years, and then an investigator for the state. So my brother and I joined the military. I joined at 19, did Army ROTC while I was playing, college hockey. But I fell in love with the Army and was so proud and was blessed that, I earned my commission, and then eventually the Army told me to go to law school, and I went back in as a lawyer and taught at West Point, and I was there when 9/11 happened, and then obviously went to combat twice. And the Army changed my life. I would never have been a member of Congress or the acting secretary of the Army if it wasn't for the Army.
What did you start out as in the military? And then what was the impetus for you to go to law school?
Yeah, I was, we were trained as an infantry officer, so about tactics that way. And so I earned my commission. And when I earned it, the Army let me go on what's called educational delay. So I took 3 years to go to law school when I was the reserve component at the time, but then went back on active duty and did 5 years, served on deployments with the 25th Infantry Division, and then as a member of the 82nd Airborne Division in the invasion of Iraq. And so I may have been trained initially for the first 3 years as an infantry officer, but I spent most of my time as a judge advocate and a judge advocate in light infantry units. So I love my experience, and it made me the person I am today.
Yeah, the JAG Corps is an interesting place. Was it a pretty, did you expect to transition out of the service and into law directly? Was that, because that's obviously the natural step there. And of course, compensation is probably a little bit better on the other side than serving as a JAG officer. Could you tell us a little bit about that progress and kind
Yeah,
of the steps you took?
sure. I've transitioned out of government 3 times now, but the first one was, after leaving then Fort Bragg, North Carolina, as an Army captain, and yeah, I went to a big law firm in Philadelphia, a national law firm called Coase and O'Connor. Yeah, it was, the compensation was basically, I was making 3 times as much as I was in the Army. It was great, and did that role as a litigator at one of the country's largest law firms. And in that role, when I was there, I did run for the U.S. Congress and won. And so there was many nights where I would literally sleep in my office. It was a growing campaign and work schedule, but we got it done as far as a team. And then when we won again, but it was important that when I did serve in that role, focus on I got a great advice from the former clerk of the U.S. Supreme Court, General Bill Souter, who's no longer with us, but he said he saw the wood in front of you. So it was, getting it done, make sure the clients are happy, make sure you do what you need to do to put them in the right position to win. But at the same time, I was, running for Congress.
And is it true you were the youngest member of Congress at that point or during that tenure?
Yeah, I was the youngest Democrat in the country. So I was 33, and, I had been an independent my whole life, adult life. And then when I ran for Congress, I, became Democrat and won in suburban Philadelphia, which is now the Pennsylvania 1st District. But, to me, it was, I was the youngest, and it was 33 and a young family. I was also one of the poorest members of Congress because I still was paying my college loans off. In fact, I had a negative net worth at the time. But, long story short, I was probably more proud of the fact that I was the only Iraq War veteran. So I kind of felt a special responsibility to be the voice of our post 9/11 generation, especially those who served in Iraq and Afghanistan.
Yeah, did you have political ambitions all along, or was it something about your service that kind of informed that desire?
No, I wasn't a political science major. I was a double major in psychology and human resource management. I did have the opportunity to meet Bill Clinton in college, which was a transformational event. It was the first time I had led an emergency sandbagging effort. There was massive flooding along the Susquehanna River, and which 6 people died. And when they were evacuating the city, they asked for emergency volunteers, and me and several dozen students, I led them. We were sandbagging to the wee hours of the morning, but I had an opportunity to then introduce Bill Clinton to our region when he was helping us rebuild. So that was pretty awesome, but I didn't switch gears. And, I was determined to go into the military and to serve my country in uniform and to follow my father and grandfather's footsteps. And my brother and I did. And, we hopefully, served with distinction and made the company of heroes that we serve with proud of our efforts.
I'm just curious how, there's a lot of JAG officers out there, and obviously you were a high performing one to get a spot in a very prestigious, high caliber law firm after service. But I mean, virtually none of them go straight into a congressional position at the age of 33 and that soon after service. I mean, how does that jump happen? What was it about your mindset or ambition that kind of set you apart to be able to do that?
Yeah, well, I was blessed. And one, I advise a lot of veterans, both Democrats, Republicans, to go into political public service. I usually tell them, do not do what I did. I got super lucky. But, I had been following it for a long time. When I was in law school, I worked for a state representative. When I was even in the Army, I was teaching at West Point. I was teaching constitutional military law, which was an awesome course to teach. And the Department Academic Counselor. I was the advisor for, it's called the Domestic Affairs Forum for cadets that, are passionate about, domestic politics. So I was active. But it was really, the turning point, frankly, was, when I was in Iraq in that invasion, we had lost 19 men in my unit. 19 of my brothers never made it home. And even the ones that did make it home, some of them are no longer with us. And, I didn't feel great about our national leadership. We were trying to cut our hazardous duty. We were in Baghdad, Iraq. It was 138-degree heat. We're getting mortared almost every night by the Iraqis. We were in South Central Baghdad in the Sunni and Shia area. And we had political leaders that were just kind of dismissive of our needs. We didn't have enough troops for the 1.5 million Iraqis. We had one combat brigade there. We didn't have doors in our Humvees. Roadside bombs were killing the majority of our men and soldiers across the country. And then they try to cut our hazardous duty pay. I remember thinking to myself, what are these jokers in Washington D.C. doing? And when you look into it, it used to be 4 out of every 5 members of Congress were veterans. Now it's less than 1 out of every 5. So
Wow.
very passionate about our brothers and sister veterans stepping up and run for office. We need more veterans who are going to put our country first.
Yeah, you said you wouldn't recommend people do it the way you did it. And I feel like that's a humble thing to say. How would you recommend veterans to approach, if they have a political inclination, how would you recommend them to approach that? And what might be a good path to take?
Yeah, well, again, I'm blessed and I'm really grateful. But I worked my tail off, as did our team, but we got very lucky, right? There's 600,000 elected positions in America, right? So to run for the top 535, I tell people become a state rep or a councilman or something like that before, so you can build a base, get a feel. When I ran, the Iraq war was the #1 issue. So in that sense, it made me uniquely qualified. And some of my other classmates, like Tim Walls from Minnesota and Chris Carney from nearby Northeastern PA, and Admiral Joe Sestak. So we were really, really lucky in that sense.
How did you balance, like, obviously what the bedrock of, it seems like what the reason why you ran was the Iraq war. How did you balance that with other things that your constituents probably cared about? And really, like, I guess, as far as running for office, was it just the Iraq war that was like your passion? You wanted to go in and change how Congress looked at that, or were there other things that you were interested in as well?
Yeah, that was the impetus of why I got in, why I gave it all up to do this. But I will tell you that, people aren't going to vote for you on one issue, right? So yeah, I had a plan saying we got to raise the minimum wage, which we did. We haven't done it since. So it's been it's been 18 years since we raised the minimum wage, which is a disgrace as a nation. I said I was going to stand for a higher, tougher ethics. We did that. I was going to fight for people's constitutional rights, including, some freedom issues with women and privacy. So, all those type of things I ran on, but also the reason why we have the greatest country in the world is because we have the #1 military, but we also have the #1 economy. So it's about bringing jobs back to the Pennsylvania 1st District. It was about creating jobs in our area and do what's necessary to put our country back in the right track economically as well.
Yeah, speaking of jobs, where do you see kind of more lucrative sectors or places that veterans should lean into as they're transitioning to the civilian world? And of course, it depends on their skill sets and background and all that, but where do you see particular opportunity today?
Yeah, well, listen, I teach at the Wharton Business School, right? So it is, we have 850 students that come in every year for a 2-year program. Hopefully about 10% of them, though, are actually veterans. A lot of times people utilize that GI Bill to figure out exactly what they want to do. There's about 800,000 students right now using the post-7 GI Bill that I co-authored, right? So we're really proud about that. But there's not one industry, right? It's like, what are you passionate about? Where do you want to be geographically? Meaning, if you're not married, where do you want to settle down? Or if you are married, where's your family want to settle down? What are the tax policies of that state? Like, these are thoughtful things you got to work through. It's not just taking the first job that you're offered and moving somewhere, but it's really an industry that, that you would be good at, that you can add value to when you join that team. And that's what I try to advise people to focus on it, and not less like, go into venture capital or go into private. I'm a venture capital and I'm an entrepreneur. Those type of things I think are important to work through it. I think there's great organizations out there that help you work through it. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce has this Hiring Our Heroes program. They do 82 events a year that are free for transitioning troops, for veterans, and for military spouses. And of the 80-some events, about 60 of them are live events in major military posts. So I tell people to show up. It's usually a 6-hour event where for 3 hours you get briefed out about tax policies, industries that they're looking at, help you set up a better LinkedIn, do headshots, but also you get 3 hours to interview with corporate America and companies that are looking to hire you to make sure that you have the same opportunities, or frankly, even more opportunities than frankly I did when I got out back in 2004.
Aside from going to Wharton, of course, that'd be a great move, but how could veterans also position themselves to be competitive for great roles out there? Hiring Our Heroes, that's a great call out. It seems like a fantastic organization, especially the work they do for spouses and families at large. But curious if there are any other things that come to mind that would help position people. And a Wharton degree obviously would be at the top of that list.
Yeah. Well, listen, a couple things. One, we have a real pain point right now, of military spouses. Most American families are dually employed or dual income families. In our military community, we're suck and win when it comes to military spouses. We have right now a 24% unemployment rate with military spouses. That's unconscionable. We got to do better for military families, period, and stop. And so that's what we do with the U.S. Chamber of Commerce, the Hire Heroes. It's what we do. My role at Wharton. I have a show on Yahoo Finance that we call Warrior Money. We talk about these things. We have these subject matter experts that come on. It's got podcast wherever you get your podcast. Check out Warrior Money. But it's really they can just then people know what options are out there and leverage the things that you have. Leverage your post-9/11 GI Bill. Leverage the VA home loan. Those things are incredibly important, and leverage your ability to reach out to other veterans or folks that care about veterans and ask their advice. So every American soldier, whether you're a barrel-chested American paratrooper like me or Navy, Air Force like my brother, the fact is this, is that, the fundamental principle of a soldier is shoot, move, and communicate, right? So do you still look like a soldier? You have those soft skills that they want desperately. But when I say communicate, does your LinkedIn communicate your leadership ability, what you have done? Also, what industries you're looking at and what you could do for them, right? Because it is about what you've done, but what you could do for the team that you'll join.
Very well
Yeah,
said.
you touch on a huge point that I think a lot of service members realize is that their spouses are willing to work and oftentimes want to, but just the constant moving is supported in the military. You just jump into the next job, you're getting paid, you never have a break in pay. But the spouses are really on the back burner in that sense when it comes to, hey, you might be a teacher or a nurse or something that you might be able to find the same position wherever you go. But even that nurse, you might need certain certifications that don't apply. And I think the military has been doing a pretty good job about assisting with those certifications, but nonetheless, it is an uphill battle for those spouses, even if it is an assisted uphill battle to constantly change careers without much support. And we see it personally. We're in real estate, so we see it constantly. It's like these women want to work, or spouses in general want to work and want to provide benefits for their community or their family, what so have you. But it's a lot harder, especially coming to Hawaii. The transition Oconus is even more difficult. And Griffin and I served together in Germany. It was even more difficult to find work in another country, right? So I love to hear that, and it is interesting. It's a big focus for transitioning service members. How are they going to pay the bills? And figuring out where they're going to end up is a big part of what their bills are going to be.
Right. And when I tell spouses, household six is what I refer to them, hey, even if you have to go volunteer somewhere, right? Be active, go network. Your network is your net worth. You got to be networking all the time. And that's why I'm a huge fan of social media, especially LinkedIn, right? You got to put yourself out there on what you're doing. So you go volunteer, you're one of the volunteer leaders, post a picture of what you're doing and why you're passionate about that organization. You got to communicate to what you're doing for folks, the goodness that you're doing, because they're not going to know, right? And it's another way it's not just about what you're doing, but follow people that leaders in the industry that you want to be part of or make connections and like their stuff and ask them for, I always tell people, don't ask people for a job. Ask them for advice and you might get a job. You ask them for a job, you're going to get advice, right? But if your overall goal is to get a job, it's like you ask them for advice, just a quick 15-minute Zoom over coffee. Most folks would do it, especially if you say, hey, I'm a military spouse or I'm a transitioning service member. And, there's a lot of goodwill out there. But as you all know, there's a lot of people that are drowning in that sea of goodwill. And we got to do a better job and take care of our brothers and sisters. Live by that ethic that we leave no one behind.
We've said on the show several times, if you ask somebody for money, they probably give you advice. You ask for advice, they might give you something that turns into money. So I love that framework there. I'm really curious, Patrick, you were a co-founder of WorkMerk, and I love the tagline, the winning habits company. If we can get a little existential here for a second, I'm curious, what are some of the truly or most important habits that people could leverage? And maybe you mentioned one, maybe it's engaging regularly on social media in a meaningful way that might draw some attention or create some long-term connections. But are there other examples or other things that come to mind with regard to habits?
Yeah, listen, I teach my kids, like, they got to they know what the rules are, right? You got to make your bed every day. You got to brush your teeth. You got to look presentable, right? They both go to Catholic school, so they wear uniform, makes it easy. Do the same thing. Yeah, I don't sit around in my PJs all day, right? I shower, shave, exercise. I really try to live my life with the performance triad in mind, right? Like, I'm a hard worker. I'm a workaholic, frankly, far too often. But I do follow the performance triad, which means I eat right, I exercise at least 6 times a week. I focus on recovery, right? Use a sauna like that. Like those I kick off every Wednesday. I do at Patrick Murphy, PA. And I do that because the average veteran will gain 15 pounds in their first 18 months out, right? And when you have the two signature injuries of Iraq Afghanistan veterans are post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, or traumatic brain injury, the best thing you do is continue to exercise, get those dopamine levels up, serotonin. And you do that, and it's not the magic bullet, but as sure as all the studies will show, it will help you, especially if you then go live a purpose-driven life. You're there in the service of others, and you join teams that have a similar mission that you did in the military.
Yeah, I did not know that stat of 15 pounds in 18 months. That's alarming. I had no idea.
Yeah, and it's not like the freshman 15 in college where you're 18, 19. It's not hard to do it, in your 20s, 30s, 40s, or 50s. So, get after it. And I think it's important. And if you see it, you can be it. And that's why I tell people about my role as an entrepreneur, as someone who lives the performance triad, someone who exercises, and what do I do to have these cheat codes to live a better life?
Speaking of those cheat codes, I mean, I look at your background, Patrick, and the things that you're currently involved in. I'm like, how does he do it all? I mean, it's like I think you still have 24 hours in the day. Last I checked, I would assume, unless your assistant somehow figured out how to multiply that. But what other frameworks or systems do you use to invest in entrepreneurs through venture capitalism? How do you start companies, invest in people, work out 6 times? I mean, how do you do all this stuff, and what allows you to seemingly have more hours in the day than others?
Yeah, well, one, I don't know if I do anything well, so I'm doing the best I can, but I think the numbers say I'm doing okay. So, one,
Pennsylvania says you're doing fine.
Yeah, I live my life with a purpose, right? So, like, I'm driving right now, and I appreciate that I have me on when I'm driving, but I'm driving 2 hours to go to Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. It's like 2 hours from Philadelphia. I stopped by Workburg, the Winning Habits Company, because we had this March Madness event. It was awesome. We had about 400 people there. It was phenomenal. I could only go for an hour, right? I would have loved to stay there and watch basketball, but that NCAA tournament, like I had to get on the road to go to this. I'm on the Dean's Advisory Committee. I used to be on the board of the school. That's my alma mater. I'm doing it because there's a new dean who needs my help. And so when he asked me for my help, I committed to it. Drive 2 hours, attend a meeting for 60, 90 minutes, drive 2 hours home.
You're doing a ton, which is, you joke that you're doing, maybe not well, but I'm sure that's obviously like tongue in cheek. I think what I'm interested in too is what sort of habits are common across the entrepreneurs that you've personally invested in with your company, and what have you seen lead to success other than maybe just a good idea or a good product? What is the guy who's at the helm of the company doing to put it all together to make you have confidence in him?
Yeah, well, first off, if they served our country in uniform, I know they have all the soft skills they need. They're going to show up on time. They're going to be leaders of character. No one will outwork them, right? So that's from the jump. But number two is you look at some of the most iconic global brands in the world were started by American veterans. The largest retailer in the world is Walmart, started by Army veteran Sam Walton. The largest sports apparel company in the world, Nike, started by Phil Knight, Army veteran. The largest media company in the world, Comcast, they own NBC and Universal Pictures, started by Ralph Roberts, Navy veteran, right? So half those veterans came back home, they started their own small business, usually small companies, and they grow these iconic global brands. And then generations since World War II, right? So you look at Ralph Lauren, or you look at Fred Smith, who's a Vietnam vet, Marine. So our generation of veterans, access to capital is a big deal, and that's why we've invested over $300 million in two different venture companies, Moonshots Capital and Sterling Lonesome Group, supporting the next generation of military leaders.
Yeah, are you guys exclusively investing in veteran founders, or is it all across the spectrum?
It's all across the spectrum. I would say Sterling Lonesome Group, based out of Tampa, right where SOCOM is, about 95% of their CEOs, leadership are veterans. Moonshot Capitals, I think it's more like 50%. So that's based in Austin. So, but to me, that's an important thing. And again, I don't mean everyone should go start their own small business. You have to have a real passion about it. You will not have a day off. You have to work weekends, right? And entrepreneurs, you're always on call. It's your company. But it's an awesome way to grow something, to lead something that could turn into something pretty special. And you work your tail off.
We spoke with Kelly Purdue on a previous episode, and he had some great insight on veteran entrepreneurs and otherwise. But yeah, to your point, a lot of people start a company and go down the entrepreneurship route thinking that they're going to escape the 9 to 5 or that they're going to escape some of the work and create something. And really what a lot of people end up creating is a job, just one that they're the imposing boss rather
Yeah.
than someone else. So it's not for
Right.
everyone. And we try to reiterate that. But I think a lot of people that listen to this show and a lot of people that we're trying to speak to are those that are up for that challenge and are willing to bet on themselves and go for that risk and see where it takes them, knowing that they could perform really well in a corporation as well. And if it comes to that after the fact. But I think a lot of the people that we're speaking to are probably in that camp of, I've reported to someone for long enough, I'm ready to give it a shot reporting to myself and see how that goes. Are there any particular mistakes that you see entrepreneurs make? I'm particularly curious in veteran entrepreneurs. Are there any maybe biases that they have coming out of the military that affect their performance as a business owner?
Yeah, I would say, what pain are you solving, right? You want to create a business, you're passionate about something, all right, you want to create a business, but people buy from with pain points, right? They're not going to buy something just because you're a veteran, or like, right? It's like, is it a product that they're going to want to buy? Is there a need? Secondly, I would say, are you ready to pivot if necessary, right? It's okay to be focused on something, do your homework, do your SWOT analysis, have a business plan, have a kitchen cabinet folks, turn around to. But if you have to adjust fire, you have to be ready to adjust fire. You can't just say, well, this is what we're doing, this is what we're doing. Like, you can't be stubborn. Yes, have that never quit attitude. Yes, outwork people, right? But you got to always remember that God gave you 2 ears, but only one mouth for a reason. And that's to make sure you're listening and paying attention to what the customers want. And I think those are the 2 things that I advise folks. But also the third part is, you can have a great product, you might even have some sales, but you sure sell better, hone your communication skills and let people know how great of a product it is and how happy your customers are. Because, the communication is incredibly important.
Yeah, a couple of things that come to mind when you say that. I think a lot of military folks, maybe I'm speaking for myself here, but a lot of folks have difficulty hyping themselves up or really advocating for themselves. And maybe it's a false humility or whatever you could chalk that up to. But I think there's also this no fail attitude. Like, I'm going to run through this brick wall until I can headbutt it down, rather than maybe taking the more humble approach and pivoting as is probably in some cases a better solution in the business world. Do you see those sort of tendencies amongst people leaving the military? And maybe that's particular amongst like Army combat arms guys that maybe have eaten more crayons than others.
Yeah, I do see it. And, you want to harness the goodness, you want to harness that energy and that determination and that grit, but you have to be focused like a bulldog on a bone when it comes to your business, on what the business needs and not just what you want to do or what others are asking you to do. Are you making every second of the day count for the betterment of you and the team that you're building out, to sell product and build something great?
Yeah, that's awesome. I think with people who are transitioning out, I mean, what would you say to them to kind of get them on the right foot if they're thinking about transition? What sort of advice would you say to somebody who's maybe 9 to 12 months out, know they're going to transition already, and they're about ready to take that leap of faith outside of the Army or military in general?
Yeah. Well, I'd say, Jack, the first thing I talked about earlier about communication. If you're not on LinkedIn with a professional headshot and what you want to do, you're wrong, right? Even if you're still in, do a headshot where it's civilian headshot, where you're in a suit and tie, and then you have, even if you're still in the military, you can talk about your military, but start thinking about how you're going to translate what you've done in the military and how that can translate to the private sector. When I talk about, when I was helping lead the Army as the acting secretary of the Army, that's a Fortune 2 size organization. We, had 1.3 million people, more than anyone else except Walmart. We had a $185 billion a year budget. Like, I would talk about it in those terms, right? So people understood the gravity, that enterprise level type leadership that I was bringing, that my team was bringing. As you said, you can't be overly humble. And I agree with them, and it makes you a better person. But better be ready to talk about yourself. And more importantly, not just what you've done, but what you can do and what you bring to the table that will help the team that you're going to join grow and succeed.
I love that you mentioned leaning into LinkedIn and making sure that you have that kind of buttoned up as you're transitioning out. I personally have found so many great connections, military and otherwise, through LinkedIn that never would have happened. So it is a powerful platform. And side note, little tactical piece of advice for people that are transitioning: active service members, and it could involve reserve. I think it's only for active, but LinkedIn just updated to where you can have a free premium account as long as you're active, and then you can have it for an entire year after transitioning as well. So great free product there. I'm curious, Patrick, with regard to, maybe this is a slight pivot here, but you founded Taking the Hill, the film production company. You also wrote a book by the same name. I'm curious, maybe we can start with the book. Where along your journey did you write that? Can you talk a little bit more about kind of the premise there? And if you could talk about what kind of informed starting that process of writing that book and putting those thoughts out there.
Yeah. Well, first off, I love to write. So I used to write newspaper column when I was a professor at West Point. It was called Murphy's Law. I used to write for my college, newspaper when I was in college. But, I kept a journal stuff when I was in Iraq. And so I want to tell my story before I became an old man of my time in invasion and how our team won the Presidential Unit Citation. And, I had one of my troops was the Paratrooper of the Year nominee, and the other one won what's called the Coggins Award for the top NCO of the Army. So, to me, I want to brag about my teammates. But even though I, had this great background of writing newspaper columns that won awards, and I had an idea for this great book that I laid out the chapters and I had the first chapter written out. My book agent said, Patrick, it's nice to meet you, but no one, I said I just won my first race for Congress. I wasn't sworn in because no one cares about a Philadelphia area congressman. She's like, no, this book can't sell. And I said, okay. I said, I appreciate you saying that, but I disagree with you with all due respect, man. I said, because this book is going to sell. I'll tell you why. I'm an Iraq War veteran in Congress. I have a pretty conservative background, but I believe in pretty progressive, moderate stances. Like a woman's right to choose and stuff like that are somewhat controversial. Catholic, right? And I walked her through that. The reasons why I thought it would sell, and I was like, but it's okay. Like, I'm going to find another agent that's going to sell this book. And she goes, she might go into something. Within an hour, literally within an hour, she put me in the conference room. I had a book deal signed with one of the biggest publishers in America, Henry, right? Had a 6-figure advance. Like, literally, the deal was papered within 24 hours, right? Now, again, I got super lucky, but I'll tell you, I didn't take no for an answer. I did not take no for an answer. And I think that's what people got to get used to doing. If you have a dream now, again, don't be stupid. If you're getting nosed by everyone and their mother and you're beating your head against your wall for years and years, then listen to. But I really was passionate about wanting to do it. So that was the book. I have a media company, as you mentioned, called Taking the Hill. And I do some stuff where I create projects to amplify the story of my brothers and veterans. So we're first responders, what we call the warrior class. So one that made word for doing the hero nurses of COVID. Our partner in that was Roswell Hospital. We've done other projects. I have this Yahoo podcast called Warrior Money with my business partner Dan Coons. Yahoo Finance is the biggest business platform in the world. They have 3 million views a day, 1.2 million on YouTube, and we're excited about that. And that's been awesome. So part of it is you have to work your plan. You have to plan your work, then you got to work your plan. And so I'm always planning. I drive home. I have a team call with an opportunity to present itself tomorrow. It's like we always got to be working. And as I tell young entrepreneurs, young students at work, ABC, always be closing.
I love the fact that you said it yourself, you'd never take no for an answer, but you're the type of person that is like, takes the why not attitude. It's like, why not be the youngest Democrat congressman at the age of 33? Why not convince this publisher that this book is going to sell and then pull the lawyer move and convince her that within an hour and get a great advance? Like, you seem like that kind of person, and that's such a great attitude to take to life in general. And I don't know if that's something that somebody can just adopt. I think maybe to a degree that they can, but I think that's something you can learn to take for yourself, that attitude of, I'm just going to figure this out. Why not me? Like, why not make this happen and not accept the no's? And I definitely hear your point. Like, if you're hearing nothing but no's along the way, you probably should take that as a sign for a pivot. But I love the tenacity and the grit of just pushing through and finding a way to yes. There's a lot to be said for that.
And as you've gained more success and experience and just continued along the path, how have you decided what not to pursue? Like, how do you balance things? Because obviously there's probably more than enough options that come along. What goes into your analysis on things that you do put effort towards versus those things that you turn away?
I think that's the one thing I've tried to learn throughout the years, to say no. I had to keep it, right? So I say no more than I say yes, frankly, on a lot of different things. The things that I care about or interested in, I have to say no sometimes, right? To me, it's about I have two beautiful kids and I have to raise them. And I have companies, some that I've started, some that I've funded. I got to make sure that look at it where a balance sheet says. Are we, we bring clients in? Are we hustling? What are we doing? We're going to do for all of us to be more successful and be more helpful. But I do think that you got to be focused like a bulldog on a bone on getting after what you want to get after, right? So for me, I want a better America. I want more veterans go on political public service. I want more veterans become entrepreneurs. So I devote my time on both those projects to make sure, right? And I want to make sure that when I do represent companies, universities, etc., that they succeed because of what I'm bringing to the table.
What I hear coming loud and clear through that, Patrick, is you have some deeply seated values and kind of core beliefs or core priorities, and that would be your family, your country, and your companies or your businesses that you are invested in, and the people that are within those. So I think that's such an important point. Have those clearly defined values, and then you can filter things through that. So when new opportunities do come, it's not like you're making a decision every single time. It's like Patrick's already decided which things matter. And so if they fit within that framework, yes, let's go for it. If they don't, which most things probably don't, it's a quick no because you already have that filter for what's important.
No doubt.
Going back to the Warrior Money podcast, I'm really curious. I think you guys started maybe towards the end of last year, and it seems like it's got a lot of momentum. What are some of the lessons you've already learned through that, or some of the key takeaways that the guests have had for that podcast that would help service members?
Yeah. I mean, our first episode was with Admiral Bill McRaven, former, commander, was there responsible for the raid to take out bin Laden, bringing to justice after he killed thousands of innocent Americans. And he talked about his job at Lazard Bank now, right? And what that is, and how he's the New York Times publisher of Make Your Bed, and Brad at University of Texas was the chancellor there, that school system, but how each new part of the journey is a learning experience and how he's hungry to learn. And I think having that mind where you're always trying to get better, I say 1% better every day, but you're always leading. And I think when you learn about other great leaders, they all have certain attributes that they've done. One of those, though, is that they're all avid readers. They all have, planned and have a budget. They all believe in things like delayed gratification. Like those are things that are necessary to succeed. And whether it's investing your money in stock market and being stoic about it, not trying to be a day trader, or whether it's creating new media projects that could change the world, or get important voices out there. If you're passionate about it and you plan your work and then you work your plan, you can do it. If you have that grit and, as you mentioned, that tenacity to get after it.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly believe in that. I think the tenet of delayed gratification is something that is absolutely common among people who are successful in life, because they can put the effort in without the immediate piece of candy that comes back, and that effort compounds oftentimes. I'm really glad you hit that. I think that's so important. It's something I hit with my kids a lot too. We've got 6-year-old, a 5-year-old, and a 3-year-old. So it's a little bit different delayed gratification for them, but it's all about building blocks of trying to create that understanding of delayed gratification.
Yeah, but I'm sure you even get at their age, right? They want to have a snack right before dinner. They want to stay up when I go to bed, right? That's part of the, hey, little man, I love you. I want to say yes to you, but sometimes I got to say no because you're the parent. You're not their friend. I mean, you can be their friend and their parent, but more importantly, you're their parent.
Right.
Jack's got exceptional kids. Their delayed gratification might be like, hey, Dad, I want to play a couple games of chess before going to bed. And Jack's like, we got to wait till the morning for that.
Yeah. Well, you and Jack are smarter than me, so I got to take lessons from both you guys.
You mentioned that great leaders are also readers, and I wholeheartedly agree with that. Are there any books that you recommend more regularly than others to transitioning veterans or to just veterans, entrepreneurs in general?
Yeah, well, there's a couple things. One, I have to plug my own book, Taking the Hill, on Amazon. I just have Bob Parsons on. Bob Parsons, the Vietnam vet, decorated Vietnam Marine, who started GoDaddy. He's one of Forbes 400 most wealthy Americans. I just bought his book. I just got another book on Brian Nichols. Brian Nichols, he's took over Taco Bell, turned it around, then did Cindy with Chipotle, and now is the CEO of Starbucks. A lot of people want to bust his chops because their Starbucks is paying him $113 million a year in salary. That seems a lot of money. But when they announced that Brian Nichols was going to be the CEO of Starbucks, the stock of Starbucks went up $20 billion. $20 billion. So how bright of a move was it for them to hire a leader like that?
That's pretty good ROI.
Yeah, right? On day one, by the way, right? So I look at it like, wow, like that's all that is pretty awesome. But part of it is like, you gotta be willing to learn. And, reading, I go to Barnes and Noble all the time. I love Barnes and Nobles, right? I just read Scott Galloway's book, The Algebra of Wealth. I am a huge fan of Scott Galloway. I've never met him. He's a NYU business professor. I teach at Wharton, but right before I got on his podcast, I was listening to his podcast with Jessica Turlov, who is a co-host on Fox News. I do work with Fox News. I'm a big fan of hers and his. This podcast called Raging Moderates. Like, to me, it's like, yeah, I'm always trying to learn and pick up things from really smart people. And you both know it's the 5 people you hang around with the most, who listen to the most, will rub off on you. So hopefully it's 5 positively impactful people.
Yeah, and I think that's just to double down on that. I think that veterans who are getting out might see you or people who are further down the line and more successful. Well, they've probably got it figured out already. They don't need to put the effort in anymore. But it's actually the opposite. Like, people who are successful are the ones constantly putting effort, they're lifelong learners. They're taking every opportunity to learn, and the success helps you learn at a faster pace, right? Because you're maybe involved with more things and you're seeing others and learning from others' mistakes. But the veterans who are transitioning out need to know, like, yeah, consume all the information. Try to read, try to learn about the industry that you're going to get into, so that way you can make a bigger splash before you actually need to learn when it matters. You don't want to learn all the lessons once you've been hired already. So there's a lot you can do ahead of time, and being a lifelong learner is a huge part of that.
Yeah, and Jack, you mentioned a point about learning from successes. Right? I've learned from a lot of my failures too, right? So I'm a big fan. One of my colleagues at Wharton is Adam Grant. He wrote the book Think Again, and he just wrote a book that really talked about, you learn more from failure. Like, don't wait for the perfect plan and then say yes, right? Have the 90% solution on time and not the 100% solution late. Like, just go do it and learn from it. And I think that's an incredibly important lesson to learn from. And by the way, like, when I read their books, like, I'll take notes and then I'll go back and read my notes like a month later or 6 months later, because I relearn it too, right? Because you're not going to remember everything. But I think that's also a little trick of the trade that I try to do, at least.
Yeah, revisiting books is such an undervalued practice. I think of the quote, one never steps in the same river twice, because it's not the same river and he's not the same person. One never steps in the same book twice, and it's mostly because you're not the same person. The book probably isn't going to change, although there are edited editions, but I think it's such a great practice to revisit things and learn those lessons and really have them cement themselves in your subconscious to put into practice, which is really what matters. Like, learning is only important if it's actually put into practice and action afterwards. I'm curious, Patrick, with, especially with the film production company, I imagine you've, by necessity, and it's obviously you're a great storyteller, you probably have had to become a master storyteller. Do you have any lessons or any insights on how to be a better storyteller or a persuasive storyteller? Because it goes much beyond just a media company. Every veteran is telling their story, whether it's through interview processes, trying to get employment afterwards, starting a company, selling the product. Like, all these things are just stories that we're telling. Any advice on how to be better at storytelling?
Yeah. Well, first, take my class at Wharton, or if you want to go to politics, take my class at University of San Francisco, the Masters of Public Policy. Listen, I was grading 8 Wharton students yesterday. They gave 3-minute pitches on their companies, and I was grading them. And I harp on fundamental principles, things like Aristotle talked about 2,000 years ago that is so relevant today. Ethos, pathos, logos, ethos, your credibility. You guys said at the beginning, hey, Patrick Murphy, former first Iraq vet Congress, entrepreneur, venture capitalist, 32nd Undersecretary of the Army, right? That's my ethos. That's my credibility, right? My logos is my logic, walking you guys through on what I've done with the numbers about entrepreneurship and why we need access to capital and things that I try to do to create success for my teammates. But then the most rare one is that pathos, that passion. You got to speak to people's heads and their hearts. What is leadership? Leadership is the ability to inspire others to do something they otherwise would not do. Leadership, when you serve our country in uniform, in the military specifically, you have a PhD in leadership. You don't know you do, but you do. So using that leadership, that ability to inspire, and not to say, hey, show up because it's 6:30 and you got to show up PT information and be the regular front. Like, yeah, but the best leaders knew how to cajole, knew how to bust chops, knew how to be firm when they need to be, right? And that's the art of leadership, which is such an important skill set, especially when you're a leader of character.
And it's practice, right? It's not just something that some people are born maybe with more inherent skills and persuasive abilities than others, but it's something that you develop over time. And as you mentioned, the more you step into failure or uncomfortability, the more you kind of develop that muscle and that ability to influence others to do something they may not otherwise want or be able to do. Patrick, as we start to wrap up here, there's one two-part question that we ask every guest, and it's one ask and one give. So starting with an ask, what's one way that somebody listening to this could help you or provide value to what you're working on?
Yeah, and I mentioned it earlier, but connect with me on LinkedIn, right? And not just connect with me. I'll save you another write me note as long as you have a photo that I could see, I'll accept it. But don't just connect, but connect and engage, right? Like my stuff, comment on it, and vice versa. I'll do the same to you, but I would say that. And it's not just on LinkedIn, but on Instagram, Twitter, or Facebook. I'm at Patrick Murphy, PA, right? So, I'd love to build a relationship with you guys and your followers. And, that'd be number one. And then two is, you took a duty to support defend the Constitution, but when you served in the military, you became a leader of character for a lifetime of service. Yes, you do not, most of you are not going to serve in uniform. I'm not serving uniform anymore, right? But I'm still giving back to my community and my country because I love my country and I love my community, right? So do what we can to help your brother and sister veterans, whether it's getting them a job, supporting them, giving them a like on their businesses, whatever it is, right? Amplify them, but also your community around it. Like give back to your school, give back to the teachers, reach out to them and take the initiative. Let them know how grateful you are and have that attitude of gratitude, which is incredibly important dynamic that people should try to master.
Absolutely. Well, you mentioned yourself, you've left federal government 3 times now. So I can't imagine a more informed, better person to talk to than you for how to transition from federal government into the private sector and into purpose-filled work. So thank you for taking the time to talk with us. This has been awesome. I know I've gained a lot from not only this conversation, but also following you on social media. You got a lot of amazing stuff. So thank you for what you do for everyone, veterans and otherwise out there.
Yeah. Well, thank both you guys for having me on. I appreciate it. I'm a big fan of you guys. And, let's do what we can because, listen, I'm really proud that I'm a veteran, right? We should all be proud. We're civic assets to this nation. We're more likely to be employed. We're more likely to start a small business for that small business to be successful. We're more likely to vote in elections no matter what our political persuasion are. All those are positive things. But we also do have that ethic that we leave no one behind. And there's too many of our brother and sister veterans that are being left behind. And I mentioned earlier the 24% unemployment rate with military spouses. Veterans, unfortunately, are 57% more likely to take their own life, die by suicide. We've lost 120,000 of our brothers and sister veterans since 9/11. I make sure I bend over backwards. I'd never victimize my brothers and sister veterans. Like I'm really super proud. We're civic assets, right? But we also know we got to do more to live by that ethic that we leave no behind. I share this free program that companies or individuals can be part of. It's called Face to Fight. You can find out more about it on facetofight.org, where it's talking about, the evidence-based practices they can do and being part of this movement of folks that people know that you can make a difference. But it's doing things like go work out, become a part of a tribe, your new tribe, live a purpose-driven life and get the help when you need before you're in desperate need for it.
Okay, we talk about how the 3 things people lose after service is purpose, tribe, and security. And you hit on all of them right there. It's a real problem. And there's a lot of great
apparently they
organizations.
gain 15 pounds too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
No, that's something you gain.
On average. Hey, listen, I gained 15 pounds, but I actually gained 25 pounds. But I did CrossFit and I got a bigger back and wider shoulders now. So, to me, it's like I like the weight, not all of it, but a lot of it. So I got trimmed out a little bit.
15 pounds can be good if you're doing deadlifts. That's the good kind.
Yeah, I didn't do a lot of deadlifts when I was in the Army. I wasn't really doing afterward. I did them a little bit, but I did them this morning. I do more of my body weight. All that. It's like you got to get after it, and you got to push yourself if you're uncomfortable. And that's part of, as we said, you learn from your successes, but you learn from your failures, and that also means, I did this video real quick on this Warrior Wednesday that I put out every Wednesday morning, but it was me struggling to put up 205 a few times. I was doing it and I was doing great, but man, it was like whatever rep it was, that was my last rep, and I was on the struggle bus, right? But I showed that, had the camera rolling. I showed, man, this isn't peaches and cream. This is like grit. This is like you got to get after it, and you got to push yourself, and you got to push. Being a good friend is like being a good coach to your friends. Iron sharpens iron. So appreciate you guys having me on. If I could ever be helpful, I'll make sure I amplify this. If you guys can check out Warrior Money, wherever you get your podcast, appreciate that too. And God bless you guys. Thanks for continuing to serve.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the Veteran Ventures Podcast. If you heard something interesting or found the show to be helpful, send it to a friend who is transitioning out of the military or considering a transition. We'd also really appreciate if you left a rating and review of the show. That helps us reach more people with these amazing stories of successful veterans. We'll catch you next time on the Veteran Ventures Podcast. And until then, go do the thing. Make that decision, have that conversation, and go find your next mission.